Many of you know me, most of you do. I am Brian Wentz. I'm the operating principal for KW Coastal Living 1 and KW Coastal Living 2. I want to welcome you. This is the February 2025 State of the Market call. And every month I bring you this call. I do it for a couple of reasons. One, I want you guys to be able to understand the numbers of the market and how what's happening in the economy translates into your business. And by a show of hands, just raise your hands, have the last couple of years been hard? Yes, it's been very hard. In fact, it's been one of the hardest periods in real estate in history. So we want you to understand the economics. We want you to understand how that affects you. And we also want you to be able to use this data to make good informed decisions, both with your consumers, but then also in your business. And when the market's good and it's going in the right direction, it's really easy to kind of ride the market and not feel like you have to dig in. And yet when the tide goes out, as the old saying goes, when the tide goes out, you figure out who's swimming naked. And it becomes more challenging. We've been feeling like things were going to shift and things were going to change for a little while, and yet it really hasn't happened yet. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to go through some of the economic updates from the vision speech. So some of this is going to be Gary Keller's slide deck, and we're going to actually break some of this down. We're also going to go into the Tri-County area and look at each county, what's going on in terms of inventory, price reductions, those types of issues. And then lastly, I'm going to touch on a little bit of interest rate information, and I will share with you, if you've been watching the mortgage market the last month, it has been a roller coaster in every direction. And I feel like as I prepare for these calls every month, I take notes through the month. And this month I had like 10 pages of notes because there's been so much that's happened. So it feels like it's been a year. So let's dive in. Let me move this so I can see this on my screen here. So give me 1 second. There we go. All right, good. So this is U.S. home sales, and this is annual resale, single-family home sales. We were concerned that we were going to finish 2024 in the 3.8 million range. Thankfully, we did pull it out to 4.1 million, and we had a little bit of an improvement from last year. Now, the reality is that when you look at the sales pace, you'll notice 4.1 actually takes us back to 2008 in terms of the actual pace. In other words, that was the last time we had that rough of a year. Now, it's a little bit of a challenge sometimes because we don't want to compare to 2008 in a lot of ways because that was a very different market. And we're going to actually, I'll show you some numbers to give you a little bit of perspective on it. And yet, in terms of agent revenue, in terms of the number of transactions, in terms of the transaction sides, it was 2008. But of course, as we've talked in the last couple of months, when we adjust the sales pace for population growth, when we were on track for 3.8 million, 3.8 million would have actually been the worst year since 1995, if you can imagine that. Now, in addition to that, when you adjust for population growth between 95 and 2024, we've added about 70 million to our population through both legal immigration and just natural births and population growth internally. That doesn't take into account any of the other issues that affect population growth, like illegal immigration, those other factors. But just on that number alone, 70 million, it actually means that last year we were basically at the lowest sales pace in U.S. history when adjusted for population growth. So the challenge is that as we were getting to Q4 last year, it looked like there was going to be a little bit of a kind of a bright side ahead, a brighter year ahead. Some of those numbers are not looking as rosy as we had hoped. And so when we look at 2025, I've seen a lot of different projections. Keller Williams is in line with pretty much everything that I'm seeing otherwise. KW Research is projecting that we're going to see a slight increase in unit count. However, it's going to be about 4.2 million. Not a stellar year, and not the year that we really wanted to. Now, it probably looks like 2025 and 2026 may still be muted, and it depends on some of the things we're going to talk about on this call. So where we really felt like we were headed kind of in the right direction, it seems like things have stalled a little bit. And when you think about this, when you look back to the 08 to 012, when you get into a trough, it typically takes about 3 to 4 years to get out of the trough. And so when you look at this trough that we've been in since 2021, you can see it's probably 25 or 26 before we actually get to that point. Now, here's what's happened. Here is what happened in the fourth quarter that kind of surprised us. You'll notice that every single month, so the kind of blue line is 2024, the pink line is 2023, and this is sales pace, annualized sales pace by month. Up top, you can see what the typical seasonality is. Typically, you see sales increase January, February, March, April. Your June, July, August nationally become your really, really high sales pace months. And then you see a drop off until about November, and you get a little bounce at the end of the year for people that are trying to get transactions closed by the end of the year and whatnot. However, if you notice in this October, let me just see if I can see that on my screen. You can see in this October, November, December timeframe, the sales pace actually increased 3.7 to 3.96, and then 4.15 and 4.24. So we actually saw a bump in the fourth quarter, which is what allowed us to get to that 4.1, 4.2 million sales pace that we ended with. Still not a stellar year, but it's an improvement, and it's going the right direction. Now, I think it's really interesting to note that the real estate industry currently is the only industry that is in a recession. So when you look at Fed policy, you look at policy coming from other facets of government, we're the only ones that's really dealing with what we're dealing with right now. And so therefore, since the rest of the economy is humming, they're not too worried about us. Although there are some signs that the Trump administration does have some plans that may actually indirectly impact us. So if we go over to look at home price appreciation, you're going to notice the trend line going up the graph. And when you get to 2023, 2024, you're going to notice that we're trending right in that roughly 10% above the trend line. So I know I hear a lot of times people say, well, housing is way overpriced, or the prices are just out, their prices are slated to come down. The reality is prices are pretty stable, and with some of the other factors, they're probably likely to stay very stable. So 9.9% over the trend line. When you look at the median sales price, 2024 was 408. 2025 is projected to be 418. Okay. Now, when you think about that, if you were to have 2 years of price appreciation growth of 0%, you would actually be back to the trend line. And typically we see about a 4% average year over year. So really, as it relates to your consumers, that especially your buyers that may say, hey, homes are overpriced, reality is we're pretty close to the trend line. We're not too far above it. Now, here's something that I want you to think about, and I call this the real estate wealth machine. The Federal Reserve targets inflation growth for 2%, and these are just some key numbers to kind of put in your mind. You don't have to know them all. But the Fed wants to see inflation running at about 2%, and of course, this last 18 months, we had some inflation that was sky high and was up in that 7, 8, 9% range. But 2% is the target. Wage growth, which is how much they want to see employers paying employees, they want to see that increase at about 3.5% per year. And then the target for home price appreciation, which is separate from the Fed, is 4%. And this is why when you look at historical gains from the housing market, this is why you see this trend line that almost always goes up, with the exception of this 2008, when we of course had a financial crisis and a housing meltdown that was really the result of really bad lending practices and some behind the scenes things that happened that the qualified mortgage rule of 2010 really kind of cured. So when you're working with your consumers, these are some good numbers to just be thinking about. And when you look at this over the long term, that means that housing is always going to, or typically will grow faster than inflation, which means the value of houses will continue to go up. Now, if we look at annualized appreciation, let me just take a look at this one. This kind of breaks this down into troughs from 1990 to 2000, 2001 through 2005, the 06 to 11, which if you were in the market during that period of time, you'll remember it was just a crazy time in terms of, it was a crazy time in terms of, I remember entire developments of new construction that the builders handed the keys back to the bank, and new builders were coming in to finish. There was just inventory off the chart. Then we get into that really big growth era that was the 2012 through 2019 era. You'll see that we had 3.9%, 8.9%, negative 4.4. So you kind of see that trend going down. The steady growth era of 2012 through 19, 6.4%. And then of course, as you got into the 2020 through 2022, the crazy run up in the real estate market, it was 12.5% in just a 3-year period of time. And of course, what goes up comes down, and that lets you kind of see where we are right now in that 23, 24, which is about 0.5%. 24 was about 4.5, so we're catching up. And then 2025 is projected to be 2.5. Now, this is a national statistic. Currently, when we talk about U.S. housing stock, I'll share this number, but currently about 10% of all U.S. inventory is in Florida and Texas. So we're kind of ground zero on that. So, and Toy asked, will we be able to get these slides? And the answer is yes, I'll be able to send these out to you as soon as we're done here today. And I'll send out a copy of the recording also so that you have that. So as you can see, we're in an era where prices are still likely to appreciate. However, they're not going to go up as fast as what they were in this 2020 to 2022 era. What that really means is when you're talking with your customers about pricing listings, I see some of the data right now that pricing still is priced as if the market is still going like this, when in reality the market is going more like this. So it's still positive, but it's not the rate of appreciation growth. And so we're having to talk to our sellers to get a little more realistic with them about pricing. Now, again, we've talked about this on past calls. This is one of the realities that we're dealing with, and this is a little bit of a sobering number. When we look back over the last 5 years, the average appreciation, the compounded appreciation of all U.S. homes has been 41%. But the challenge is during that same period of time, over 5 years, wage growth has only been 14%. So when we talk about the combination of the higher prices, the higher interest rate, and the lower wage growth, what has really transpired is we just have an affordability issue. And when we hear stories or we hear people talk about the rate lock-in, I'm not really a fan of the rate lock-in conversation. It's just really people can't afford what some of the payments are. And I know I've talked to agents that had clients downsizing from larger houses to smaller houses, that their payment was actually going to go up, which is, that's a challenge. Now, what I said here is appreciation outpacing wage growth plus the higher interest rates, just an affordability issue. And this is a slide, this would be a really good one to use with sellers in your listing presentations. This is courtesy of the National Association of Realtors. When you see this, you're going to notice this column shows the average principal and interest payment from 2021 through 2024. And this is actually through Q3, third quarter 2024. Over here is the amount of income that it takes to be able to qualify for that payment based on the median family income. And you'll see here that it's been a 72% increase in the actual principal and interest. And this is before taxes and insurance. And of course, when you look at some of the statistics later in this, you're going to see insurance costs have been rising at a very, very high rate, with natural disasters and other issues putting pressure on insurance. So you've got a 72% increase in a cost and a 46% increase in the income needed to qualify. And this is just where at these current interest rates, it's been harder for consumers to be able to lean in and actually purchase. Okay. Now, if you guys have questions, don't hesitate, put them in the comments there, or don't hesitate to come off mute and just ask. So anything that you guys want information on, we'll make sure we provide. This is also a really good one for you to have just to reflect on. When we look back at home price appreciation, one of the first things you'll notice in this graph is that even when rates went up, we typically still saw appreciation, except when we had excess inventory. So when you go back to the 1959 era, we had a recession and we had a very large federal funds rate increase. 1970s, we had the energy crisis and we had stagflation, where inflation grew very rampantly and the economy just stagnated. The economy didn't grow. Of course, you have that 79 through 81, which was the second fastest increase in the federal funds rates, also to combat inflation, second only behind what just happened here the last couple of years. And you'll see you'll see appreciation still stayed above the 0% trend line, but it got pretty close in 82. We also had the savings and loan crisis in here, the housing bubble of 05 through 08, and actually 05 through 010 through 2010. And then you'll see here this crazy run up that for many of our agents that got into the market in that 2020, 2021, this felt normal. And all of a sudden, what has returned to a more normal market just feels unusual because we were used to this kind of appreciation. So you can see that we're in an environment here where the Fed is starting to lower interest rate, federal funds rates, and yet we're still in positive territory. And I think when I think about this graph, I see people on YouTube and wannabe economists talking about how prices are going to crash and the real estate market's going to crash. The reality is the statistic, the troughs, the trends just don't show that at all. And so when we move off of price appreciation, this is one number that is valuable to be able to look back at. On average in the United States, residential resale listings, we typically have about 1.1 to 1.2 million active inventory. Currently today, there are 640,000, I think it was 640,027 across all states in the US. But when you look at 2009, we were sitting at 3.57 million listings. So when you go backwards on that slide and you look back to 2009, that glut of inventory, when sellers were forced to sell, they couldn't buy because the credit constraints had changed. That's really where you see prices depreciating and not going back up. And of course, at 640,000, we're only half of what a typical US housing market looks like. So we still have a long ways to go up. The good news is this tough time has helped us recover from what we call a savagely unhealthy market. Because we got to the low of about 221,000 listings in the entire United States. It's just crazy. So again, Gary's comment at the summit was that you may be buying at the top of the moment, but never the top of the market. So for your clients that are looking to try to time the market or trying to time interest rates, it's really a good time to be a buyer. Prices are becoming negotiable, certainly in our area. You still have rates that are improving. If you can get qualified, the likelihood that the rates are going to go down in the future, you can lock in today's pricing at today's rates, and then you can refi when rates come down. So just advice that can be helpful for your clients. The other perspective is don't wait for the right time to buy real estate and just give it time. Okay. So let's look at volume. This is total volume of all US homes sold in the US. This is residential resales. When you look at 2024, we were still the third best year in history. So while it felt like a tough year unit wise, we actually had a really, really great year. The only years that were better were 2021 and 2022. So in the recent past, again, for those agents that are a little bit newer in the business, give you a little bit of perspective. It's not always this good. And yet, in terms of average commission per transaction, this is still a good time to be in the market as an agent. The one statistic that's a little interesting here is we expected with the changes in buyer brokerage and compensation agreements, we expected to really see a lot of agents getting out of the market last year. And while we did see attrition rates that were a little higher than average, it wasn't super high. So currently we've got about 1.5 million. Last year we had about 1.6 million. That's only about 100,000 different in NAR agent count. And it's interesting, I know the last statistic I saw said that there was a record number of agents in real estate school currently. I believe it was about 593,000. So we haven't seen that attrition. One just side note, I know that in agents that I've been talking with in all of our offices, the average commission per transaction has actually been going up and that's an indicator that when good agents have control of being able to negotiate their pricing with their consumer, good agents negotiate better prices than crummy agents. So when we look forward to 2025, we're looking at about 2.33 trillion of total US sales. This slide talks about inventory, and this is the absorption rate, the annual absorption rate of the inventory on the market. In other words, how fast would things sell based on the sales pace? And you can see currently 24, we ended the year at 3.7. A balanced inventory is anything 6 months, right, or plus or minus 6 months. So you can see when we see some of the numbers, especially even down in the local county statistics where it shows that it's still a fairly balanced market. We're a little bit in buyer territory in a couple of areas, but it's a fairly balanced market when you look at most areas. Condos are a little bit of a unique breed right now. But 3.7 months of inventory, still, things are relatively normal. When you look at that average, you see that 08, 09, we were 11, pushing 12 months of inventory. And then, of course, it doesn't date back until the 80s that you saw similar numbers. So in terms of months of supply, we're still in pretty good shape. Mortgage rates. We're going to talk a little bit about this throughout today's discussion. You're going to notice that mortgage rates, of course, in the 80s were as high as 17%. They've come down, and you just kind of can see it's just kind of almost a slide of it falling down right here until we hit that 2022, that June of 2022 timeframe. Historically, when we look back at the last 1990 through 2024, which is considered to be the statistical time frame that we're operating in, the average interest rate was at 6%. So with us being at 7.2, we haven't been that much higher. But again, the cost of homes in terms of the price appreciation and real wage growth, those are the two challenges. When you look back all the way back into the 70s, the long-term historical, it's been 7.72. So anything below 7 is still good. It's just when people are used to 2.31, which we'll probably never see again in our lifetime, it's just a little bit of rate shock that they're experiencing, okay? The other thing I'll say on mortgage rates, anytime we get into a 6 handle on rates, 6 point anything, you do see sales pace start to pick up. And so when we get to the rate environment at the end of this, talking about what's happened even in the last 30 days, there's actually some good data in here where a lot of other stuff leading up until really the start of February wasn't that great of data. If we look at rates monthly here, you can kind of see this 2021, this 2020 through 2021 range. You can just see how fast everything shot up. And this was the challenge in terms of affordability. And then, of course, when you get back to January of 25, we just keep having conflicting economic data. And again, when I talk about this, this is where every other part of the economy is expanding, is almost a little bit warm. GDP growth, just all of the other factors are there. Housing just happens to be the one economy, or the one part of the economy, that is still in a recession and has been now for technically 4 calendar years. So again, this is really good to talk about with your sellers, because this does give some perspective as to why the pricing that they were looking to get maybe even 24 months ago isn't probably going to cut it in this market. Now, a couple things to remember is that factors that affect rates, that's supposed to say rates in 2025. The Fed can choose to cut the federal funds overnight rate. Of course, that's the rate that banks charge each other for loans when they have excess cash overnight. That has a very indirect relationship with interest rates. And in fact, Fed policy when it comes to the federal funds rate is probably about 60 or 65% of what impacts interest rate movements. That other 40, 35% comes from the moves in the 10-year treasury, and that has an absolute direct impact through what we call the spreads. And if traditionally, if we see a treasury note is at, let's say, 4%, we're going to see somewhere between a 1.5% to 2% difference in the 10-year treasury and the 30-year fixed rate. So at a 4% 10-year treasury, you're going to see about 5.5% or a 6% interest rate. The challenge over the last couple of years is the spreads, which typically are about 1.5%, grew to almost 3%, and at one point inched just a tad over 3%. And that's how we got nearly 8% rates in this last period. So those are a couple of factors. Now, when we look at the homeowners that are out there, and these are some things that you're really truly dealing with, 74% of mortgages currently have an interest rate of 5% or less. And when you look at this, 22%, almost a quarter, have interest rates under 3. 34% have 3 to 4. At 4 to 5, you got 18%. 5 to 6, 10%. Now, a lot of these are people that actually transacted this last year, and then 16% have rates 6% or higher. And I believe I've got a slide on here. I do. So when we talk about the lock-in effect and what's going to change, when you look at the percentages built into this or baked into this pie chart, over time, as consumers start to move, you're going to see these rates change. So every year, part of the roughly 4.2 million sales pace, as they transact, they're going to have a higher interest rate until the average existing loan rate just normalizes with the market. Now, it depends on how long that's going to take, but this is going to happen through purchases that are necessary, or even refinances that just become necessary. And the reality is you have a lot of home equity lines of credit, a lot of refi starting to happen, debt's going up, and we'll show that slide here in a minute. But we're probably somewhere in the neighborhood of about 2 to 3 years away from transactions starting to normalize where the rate lock-in effect won't be there. And I forget the number. I do have it in my notes here somewhere, but I believe it was about 28%. And someone had the number, about 28% of all US homes did not even have a mortgage on it. So if I can find that in my notes, I'll pop that in here. So for, quarter of the homeowners, it doesn't even matter what the rate is. And here's the kicker. When we look at affordability, this is the challenge. This shows principal and interest as a percent of income. And this is a different version of the chart that I showed you that was the last 5 years that NAR provided. When you look back in that historical range, 2000 through 2023, it was about 20%. So in other words, about 20% of the household income would need to go towards the principal and interest of a portion of the house payment. When you go back further, back into the 70s, that long-term number is about 27%. And for those of you who have been in the industry, you know, we talk about front-end ratios and back-end ratios. And typically it was 36 and 45, traditionally front-end ratio and back-end ratio, which means that on average, lenders wanted to see people be under 36% of their total household income for their total PIDIO payment, and then under 45% for the total debt structure for all fixed payments. Well, when you look at 32% going to 32% of the household income, almost a third is just for the principal and interest, you start to see where this affordability issue is really coming in, and where we're still seeing the sales pace reduced and blunted just by the cost of money, really, at the end of the day. So that's a little bit of the things that affect the housing market. I'm going to talk a little bit here about the US economy and just some other things to be thinking about so that you have a little bit of an idea. Excuse me. First thing to look at is GDP, and GDP is gross domestic product, or it's the final value of the total output of all goods and services in the US. So, you know, just a milk and cookies explanation, GDP is just how much did we produce as a country? What was the cost of everything that we produced? And you'll see in this slide that historically, we've seen a lot of 2-3% years, although we do have, of course, through the housing bubble that was 2008, 2009, we actually saw the economy shrink. We also saw the economy shrink here in 2000 or 2020. That was that post-pandemic recession. And when you see GDP going backwards, it's really, we're talking about recessionary environment. Now, the interesting part is that GDP growth typically is targeted for about 2%. However, the last couple of years, we've been seeing it be more like 2.5%, a little closer to 3%. And that's a good thing that the economy is growing, and yet the economy can grow too fast. And so one of the challenges when we look at this, of course, I said historical is about 2%. We've been a little closer to 3%. When you get too much above 3%, you get what we call overheating, which is just where we start to get in these periods of rapid price increasing. And then, of course, that leads to inflation. And that causes us to go up and then go right back down. This is where the Fed, when they look at the fiscal policy, you know, they're looking at this and they're saying, hey, we're still growing at 3%, and probably projected to grow by another 2.5-3% in the year ahead. Again, that's some of that data that tells us why the Fed isn't taking action like we would like them to, because they're watching out for the rest of the economy. So pay attention to GDP growth this year. And when we look at this quarterly, you just see the what we saw during the pandemic, otherwise known as the people buying toilet paper days. We saw the supply shock, which we stopped making things, people bought everything, the economy shut down, and we didn't make enough stuff at that period of time. And then, of course, the pandemic kind of came to an end and we went back to buy stuff. And now there was a lot of manufacturing going on. There still wasn't a lot of inventory in the shelves, but we had that backlog. And I think this just gives you a really good picture of what happened in that period of time. And you can see that quarterly, we did have a little bit of that 22 period of time when we did go backwards a little bit in GDP, a couple of quarters there, but it's been pretty stable since. So that's good. That's what we want to see. And yet we don't want to get too high on the GDP growth. Okay. Like I said, this is partially why the Fed's hawkish. Unemployment. So the Fed has two mandates. They have two goals. These are the two things that they do over everything else. Is they look at stable inflation. They want to keep inflation stable at 2% is their target. They want to keep unemployment at 4%. At those metrics, they feel like it's a very balanced market and everything's happening the way they want it to be happening. Now, when we go back to look at this graph, you'll see that we've been running, and this is part of what happened last year, is we saw unemployment rates go down when we expected them to go up. And of course, post-pandemic, we were running at a little over 8%. We kicked down to 5%. 2022, we were 3.6, 2023, 3.6. That's a pretty tight job market. And we did have a lot of revisions in that period of time where we had numbers that looked like employment was going to be higher, unemployment was going to be higher, and then the revisions came back lower. And that happens, that's normal. So we're sitting at 4% right now. Not high, not low, very stable, but also an indicator that the Fed may not make a lot of moves unless a couple of things happen. And this is kind of an interesting one. The Fed indicated earlier this year that if unemployment were to creep up over 4.3%, that would be a point where they would pivot and they would start to look at additional cuts. And of course, we came into this year talking about 5 or 6 rate cuts. And then we got down to as little as 1 to 2 rate cuts, with the first cut not expected until September. However, and again, this is a political conversation when I talk about these things. The Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, in the efforts to curtail the size of the federal government's workforce, this actually could have an indirect relation on, or a direct correlation, I guess, to the unemployment rate. In other words, if DOGE really succeeds in cutting a large number of jobs from the federal government, when we look at the last couple of years, a significant number of the job growth has actually been in the government sector. In other words, and by that I mean almost disproportionately, it's been government and healthcare. And so while the president and the executive branch doesn't have the ability to directly control the Fed, it's an independent organization, by doing things that would push unemployment up, they might actually push the Fed's hand a little bit in having to be in a position to start to see some rate cuts. So I think the next 30 to 60 days are going to be interesting on this to see where this goes. I don't know which way it's going to go, but we're watching that closely. And of course, Trump actually appointed Jerome Powell, the head of the Fed, the Federal Reserve, but they don't get along very well. So it's a little bit of a love-hate relationship between the two of them. So when we dive back into this, when we look at annualized unemployment over the long term, you can kind of see where we are right here, and we're in pretty healthy territory when you look back over the long term, even going back into the 1960s. Oh, personal savings rate. This is a really key one, and this does directly affect your consumers, especially your buyers and your first-time buyers. So when we look at these troughs and you look at that 1973 through 2006, that was a area of very stable prices and a lot of financial products coming into the marketplace that enhanced consumer optionality. And you'll see that the savings rate was as high as 13.5% back in the early 70s. And by the 90s, it had fallen to 9.5%. 2005, of course, we bottomed out in that 05, 07, 09 timeframe. People rebuilt. And of course, then we started to see the rates come down and people move back into the marketplace. When you look at savings rate through the pandemic, we hit a very, very high level where U.S. depositors, consumers, had deposits that were about 11.1% of their total income. What's happened since then? Well, you can see we've dropped. We're at about 3.8%, and we're dropping. And that is getting us back into that 06, 07 era range. So people are spending a lot of money. They're also putting a lot on credits, and their costs are going up. And this is, again, when you see just the affordability issue that we're having, this is all a part of it. They're just spending a lot of money. And a lot of that is due to the fact that they're spending on experiences and outpacing their ability to earn with experiences. We see that a lot in the economy, and Gary talked a little bit about that in the vision speech. Rents have increased, and of course, we've had just inflation that's happened over the last couple of years. So everything just costs more. We all know that when we go to the grocery store. This is a slide I added.
Brian?
Yep, someone have a question?
Yeah, don't you think a lot of that people are spending money on other things because they can't afford a house? They can't afford the mortgage, so they're putting their money elsewhere. And
Yeah.
satisfying that need for something new is how I look at it. I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but
Yeah,
at least younger people, I think.
I don't disagree. And we see a trend of the demographics that the values of saving versus spending now, the newer generation or the younger generation does have more of an affinity to say, hey, I'm not going to sacrifice. I want the experience because I value the experience. So a lot of that is demographic changes. I agree. Now, all this said, the interesting part is U.S. balance sheets when it comes to the equity. We're in a time where we've never had homeowners with as much equity as they have today. So the balance sheet of a homeowner is good. It's just a lot of that equity is locked up in real estate. Going back to this is a really fascinating one. When you look at the total debt balance, the blue is the total of all mortgage debt. The red is the total of all non-mortgage debt. And these overlap, so you can kind of see the correlation, and yet they're two different metrics. In 2019, going into Q4, the total of all non-housing debt in the US was $4 trillion. In 2024 Q4, it's almost 5.1 trillion. That means that we've added 20% in the last roughly 5 years, 20% increase in US debt. And we do see a lot of that is in student loan debt. Unfortunately, we're going to see a stat on that number here in a moment. But that's on the rise. And again, that is impacting our ability to to afford the housing. We're going to talk a little bit about consumer price index. That slide might be out of order. So let me just see here 1 second. I don't know where my slide went to. Okay. So CPI, consumer price index, is a measure of how prices change over time. And because you've got some components of the CPI that are volatile, like energy and food costs, those tend to fluctuate a lot over time. When you hear CPI talked about, you're going to hear it talked about as core CPI, which excludes the energy and food costs. So it's just like a basket of goods that they say how much does that basket cost year over year? And then CPI includes energy and food costs. And of course, the target, again, you want inflation at 2%, you want CPI, the cost of consumers, matching that inflation rate at 2%. Now, I believe I have a CPI slide in here, but if not, we had some surprises in January. We expected the CPI to be a little bit higher. It came in lower. In fact, there were 3 or 4 headline reports that were all misses in January. And while that's kind of bad for the rest of the economy, it actually is not a bad thing for us, because that starts to move the stock market. It moves money out of stocks into bonds. Bonds go up, the yields on bonds go down, and that impacts our interest rates. So let me show you how a couple of these things come together. Here you can see the annualized inflation rate. How much did costs go up and at what point? And of course, you can see really since the 1980s, since 79 to 81, we've not seen a period of inflationary pressure until, it's been that long ago. So if you remember, that was the end of the Carter administration and the beginning of the Reagan administration. Now, this is one of the challenges, is when you look at what are we projecting, and this is KW economists, what are they projecting the inflation, the CPI to be, and core CPI to be in the next period? 2024, core CPI without food and energy was up 3.2, and CPI was up 2.9. So it's interesting. Food costs and other things actually went up higher than energy costs. The challenge is 2025, we're still expected to be above the 2% target range, so 2.1 and 2.2, and it's not until 2026 that we would then be able to see things start to balance back out to that 2% range. This is again an indicator that we, coming into Q3, Q4 of last year, it looked like 2025 was going to be a banner year. It's looking like maybe it's still going to be a little bit muted. We may have more of the same for the next 12 to 18 months. So we'll watch that closely and see what happens. A couple of things that affect this, and this is where executive policy does come into play. Trump's policies on energy drilling and bringing down energy costs, that could bring the CPI down faster than what it would naturally do on its own. But as I said, it'd be 2026 before it would completely normalize. So a couple of economic risks to really think about for 2025. Gary indicated unpredictable policy, which is trade, the tariff dances that are happening, immigration, regulation, and spending. And all of these are things. Now, by the way, this slide was put together before family reunion. So ironically, some of the things that have happened this month and frankly this week, they add to or they change this conversation. The second thing is natural disasters. Natural disasters are obviously on the rise. We all know that in terms of the number and the scope of the disasters. And then lastly, international conflict and what happens in Ukraine and some of the other locations. I know typically, I forget the exact number, but typically there are something like 103 average conflicts around the world. And currently, I believe it was like 361 conflicts that were currently being fought around the world. So we just have a lot of international conflict happening. On the things that really matter to real estate, all this other stuff affects the economy, but what really matters is what's the price of the home, what's the cost of the money, and what's the unemployment rate. Those are the three things that are going to directly influence the things that matter to us. Now, you guys heard a lot about tariffs happening. This is, I see a lot of, I'm going to call it misinformation or just information out there that's doom and gloom around this. And again, this is an apolitical discussion. In the first Trump administration, the president then was very careful to implement tariffs at times when the monetary policy was, when the health of the US economy was at a spot where any potential increases in inflation could be absorbed without it really being felt by the consumer. And so I call this the tariff tap dance, because a little bit, I think about this like an agent shows a buyer's agent. So Leslie, I'm looking at you on my screen. You show a buyer a home, and it is like the home of their dreams. And the other agent calls you and says, "Hey, what'd they think?" And you go, "There are a lot of really nice listings. It's on their list. I'll let you know if they want to write an offer." And they're ecstatic and over the moon about the house, but you're never going to let the other side know that. Well, the tariff tap dance is a little bit like that. It's about negotiating, it's about bargaining, it's about positioning to get the best deals when it comes to some of the international monetary policy or just the trade issues. And the reality is we've had a trade deficit for a number of years. He's looking to bring that down. That means money goes out of the US more than it comes back in. And so if this is my personal belief, so this is this is my opinion. I think if we were really looking at tariffs as a long-term strategy, it would be a tariff across the board. It would be on everything. It wouldn't be targeted. It wouldn't have, this percentage for this percentage for that. And tariffs have to be in place for a long period of time to actually have an impact. And so I think a lot of this is just posturing and positioning to improve the value of the dollar and to improve the trade deficit that we have with other companies. And so, some of the reasons we do this is revenue, protecting new and emerging industries, protecting established industries like the steel industry, of course, is one that is at play right now, national security, and then political leverage. And there's, of course, targeted and blanket, and most everything that's been talked about has been targeted. And that's why I say this is all just posturing and positioning. And of course, in several cases, the threat of the tariffs, the U.S. executive branch at least got what they wanted. And this is just an interesting slide. Gary put this in, and I thought this was really valuable to kind of reflect on. There was a point in time where in the U.S. we did not have a personal income tax. Everything was actually paid through tariffs and duties, in import taxes. And so when you look at this, the yellow is how much came from duties and tariffs. The pink was the sale of public lands. And then the blue was excise tax. And when you look at how in 1862, when the wartime income tax first got implemented, then you can see we then had 1913, the Congress levied the personal income tax. And you can kind of see how we transitioned as an economy from tariffs and duties to income tax based revenue streams. I just think this is an interesting slide to just look back at history, and see now today the amount that's collected in duties and tariffs is very, very small slice of the total expenditure of the government. Okay, so that gives you a little bit of economic perspective. I'm going to show you a little bit of what's going on in the national housing market so that you've got a little bit of perspective on how this all comes together. And of course, this data is from Altos data. Altos tracks every listing in the US in real time. So where the National Association of Realtors and a lot of the other data is anywhere from 1 to sometimes 3 to 4 months old, Altos updates every single day, and we get a complete update once a week. So when we look at the national housing market, we always have in these updates what we call the market action index, and that gives us a sense of, are we in buyer's market territory or are we in seller's market? Where are we at? Nationally, we're at a 36, which is actually pretty good. We're into the seller's territory. It's a slight seller's market when it comes to the national market. Now, again, as I said earlier, Texas and Florida currently make up 10% of all active listings. So we have a disproportionate amount of the inventory. And you look at states like, I believe I saw the other day, it was Massachusetts. I believe I saw they had like one half of, they had their inventory levels or their absorption rate was like one half of 1 month. So it was like 0.5, like there is no inventory and things are still selling fast. So of course, different areas, I believe it was Montana also ironically had a really, really low inventory and high sales pace. So when we look at the national market, the median list price right now is $429,000. So the average, all listings above, all listings below 429 is the middle point. The median price of new listings is running at 425. So you can kind of see people are starting to price a little more aggressively ahead of the market. I'm not a big fan of average dollar per square foot, but it gives you a benchmark. I think average dollar per square foot is a little bit like saying, what's the average number of tires per car? Well, you can have a Yugo and you can have a Maserati, and they both have 4 tires. So that's why I don't love that statistic. Nationally, the average days on the market's running at 119 days. Median is 84. So you can see the new listing inventory is starting to impact that number. And nationally, this is an interesting number. Price decreases are currently at 33%. Historically, we see a healthy market. 34% of all listings will have taken a price decrease at any given point. So we're actually in a healthy market nationally. Price increases, a lot of these crazy sellers that decided their price went up. This does not include new construction. So I never know really what causes those price increases, but 3% of the homes have taken price increases. 10% are relisted from a previous period. And then of course, 640,221 current homes for sale. These are single family resale homes. Traditionally, we're at about 1.1 to 1.2 million. So we have roughly half the inventory that we need going into the future. But roughly 82% of all customers that come to the market that are buyers bring a listing. So we're going to see that number continue even as sales paces increase. Now, if we kind of look a little bit deeper into some of these numbers, we just compare it to last month, you'll notice the median list price has actually fallen a little bit. The median price of new listings has gone up. So sellers that are entering the market in this first quarter, they're pricing aggressively. And I think we're going to see that those prices will take price reductions, but it's still early in the year. And when you look at inventory, January, we were at 682,000. We're currently at 640,000. This is an anomaly. We typically will see the spring housing market, we'll see inventory climb every month until about June or July. We're actually seeing inventory coming off the market right now. So we're going to watch that trend. That could be something that is not, specific to the market. And yet we didn't really have any holidays in there. So we'll continue to watch that and see what happens. Of course, when we look at US housing inventory, March 24th, 2022, we hit an all-time low of 240,000 homes for sale in the entire United States. Currently, as I said, we're at 641,000. You can kind of see that trend. Through the third and fourth quarter, inventory grew, and now you see a little bit fewer homes coming onto the market. Average days on the market in the US, July 8th, 2022, we had a low of 54 days. We're currently sitting at about 118 days, with the 90-day average being 116. So we're pretty stable in that 115, 120 days on the market nationally. Properties with price decreases. Currently, we're sitting at 33%. Of course, March of 2022, you're going to hear a common trend throughout a lot of this data. That March timeframe of 2022 is when we saw some all-time lows that were savagely unhealthy, and that was 16% of the market took a reduction. Now, when we drill down into the local housing market, we're going to cover Sarasota, Manatee, and Charlotte counties. When you look at Sarasota County, you'll notice right off, we have moved into the slight buyer's advantage. This actually happened for the first time last month. So you'll notice above that, it says pricing stayed about the same. Inventory held steady, but we're still a little bit in buyer territory. When we go through some of the key stats, 519,000 is the median list price, with the median price of new listings of 499. So again, like national numbers, you're seeing new listings pricing a little bit more aggressively, and and those will bring some of those other prices down. Leslie, you are correct. This is currently single family residentials. I do have some condos in here, and in a future one, will actually break the condo market down a little bit further. We just had a lot this month. So if we look at average days on the market, we're running 113, very similar to national numbers. Here is a couple of interesting things. Relisted is only 4%. So we're seeing a lot of expireds not come back onto the market, which is interesting. And then we got some inventory numbers I might go through. To answer your question, Leslie, here is some data on condo market Sarasota. So if we go back up, 519 is the median, with 499, the median price of new listings. Condos are running in that 399 range real consistently. Average days on the market, 111. Median days, 63. So we have a lot of newer listings on the market. Price decreases 40%. So you're seeing a very substantial percentage of listings taking price reductions. Only 3% are relisted. And there's 2,140 condos for sale in Sarasota County. Now, if we look through some of these inventory statistics, just to get a sense of what's happened, and again, for the new agents that came into the market in this 2020 through 2024 timeframe, it was just a unique time. And when you look at this graph, March 4th of 2022, we had a low in Sarasota County of only 328 homes for sale. And when you think about that, that's like a very small neighborhood's worth of houses if you were to just draw a box on a map and identify 325 houses. Today, we're sitting at 4,380. The 90-day average is 3,790. So inventory is building. We are seeing that build. We're more than 10 times, or almost 12 times that we had at our low. We look at days on the market. May 27, 2022, we had a low of 37 days on the market. Of course, that's when everything had 15 offers on it. Currently, we are running about 112 days on the market. Our 90-day average is 116, so we're actually, days on the market is coming down a little bit, and that may be just new listings hitting the market. When we look at median list price, what's the middle of all prices? We're currently at 519,000. March 11th, 2022, we had our high of almost 700,000. And then when we bottomed out at the start of COVID, January 1, 2021 was really that low. So we went low, we went high, and now we've kind of leveled back off a little bit. This is an interesting one. Properties with price decreases, Sarasota County. We're currently looking at 47, actually 48% of all listings have taken a price reduction already. It's a lot higher than the 34% on average. Now, I still contend that's not an indicator that prices are falling. That's just an indicator that sellers were overpricing, thinking they could get 2021 prices for their house or 2022 prices, when in reality, 3 and 4 happened, and you just saw that rate of appreciation or that rate of price growth start to moderate a little bit. Again, I think it's important to know March 18th, 2022, 13.2% was the low that we hit. These are really great slides to be able to, these are really great slides to be able to put into your listing presentations. And Wayne, it looks like you had a question. Do you want to come off mute and ask?
Sure will. Brian, I track this weekly. Love these numbers. What I'm seeing over the last 4 weeks, that median price in Sarasota, 4 weeks ago was 485, 3 weeks 480, 2 weeks ago 469, last week 459. The other thing, so I am seeing in the last 4 weeks that price has come down from 485 to 459. The other thing that jumps off the chart, you're hitting discount rates. Last 3 weeks in Sarasota County been running over 11 to 13%. That's the highest it's been in 6 months. So I'm taking the original list to sell price.
Yeah, and that's where, so a couple things on that. When we look at, I don't have it reflected in here, but I can break this down into the top quartile, the second quartile, the third, the tertiary, and the fourth quartile. When I break the data down that way, you see very disproportionately the upper end of the market is stalling faster than the lower end of the market. And that's both in terms of median list price in each one of those quartiles, and also on days on the market. And in fact, the lower 2 quartiles were super fast and very consistent, and the upper was just an absolute outlier. So I'll make sure I get those in there, but thanks for sharing that. And that may be just an indication that when you aggregate all that together, you have more homes hitting the market that are at a more affordable price, not because prices have dropped, but because that's the sellers that are entering into the marketplace. Now, 2 or 3 months from now, we'll be able to look back at the data and figure out which one it was, if that makes sense. Cool. Let's jump over to Charlotte County. Charlotte County, we are still in a slight buyer's advantage. It is 27 is the market action index, so buyers have the advantage. Median list price is 424.9. Median price of new listings 420,000. So again, we're a little bit, we're seeing new listings coming to the market a little more reasonable, which means that existing inventory that hit last fall, they'll have to adjust to compensate for the new sexy listings hitting the market. Only 3% have had, 49% have had price decreases. Only 6% are relisted, and median rents are running $2,700 in the county. If we flip over to the condo market for Charlotte County, you'll see that we actually this says slight buyer's advantage, but 25 starts to get into buyers markets, like strong buyers markets. You see median list price trends there at the top, 298. They have come down. Median list of new prices median price of new listings, 295. Median days on the market, 91, with an average of 146. So you can see where things are starting to become market stale. Price decreased 45%, and 5% have been relisted. So You do see that condo market starting to be really impacted by insurance rates. And of course, the HOA increases. I know my personal HOA, when I bought it, was about $680 a month, and I'm now $1,900 a month. And it's just, it just is what it is. So when we look at Charlotte County, inventory, we had a low in June of 2021 of 282 listings. Today, there are 3649, and that's significantly higher than the 90-day average. So inventory is building, as you see in the graph. Average days on the market. We had a low in Charlotte in June of 2022 of 39, and we are currently 133 days on the market for the single family market. Median list price running 424.9. May of 2022, we had a high of 529. And then of course that little weird time before the pandemic, November 13th, that low of that period was 274,000. So you can still see in this, prices in that period of time in basically about a little over 4 years have not quite doubled, but it's like 65% higher. Properties with price decreases are on the rise, with 49% taking a price reduction, up from the low in February of 2022 of 11.4%. Then when we kick over to Manatee County, Manatee's interesting. Some of the trends there are a little different. We're still in a slight seller's advantage across Manatee County. Median list price has been on the rise, 564,000, with the median price of a new listing 596. Average days on the market 100, so a little less than what we've seen across the other markets. I think that, to Wayne's point, this may be, you just have a little bit more of an affordable market in the Manatee County, and as a result, you may have that lower two quartiles of the marketplace, the first 25 and the second 25%. I think that's still moving pretty fast in this area. You do, though, see 49% of all properties with price decreases, and median rent's $2,900. We break this down a little further into the trends. The inventory in Manatee County, we're currently looking at 2,759. Single family resales for sale, 268 was our low. So again, we're 10 times. You see a pretty common trend across the markets that we're somewhere between 10 and 12 times what we were at our lows. We are still not to historical levels, and that's an important point to make. When we look at average days on the market, we're sitting at 100 in Manatee County, up from 32 at the low. Median list price, 564, down from the 857 in 2022. I think that's a pretty staggering change when you look at that graph. And then of course, properties with price decreases, again, we're running about 50%. And this is a very unusual statistic for this time of the year. Traditionally, January, February, March, you'd probably see something like 26 to maybe 29% have a price reduction, where it would average 34% over the year. So this is a very high number early in the season, and certainly something to watch. Last thing I have for you is just a little bit of mortgage rate update. And as I alluded to, the last 30 days has just been an absolute roller coaster of activity. Rolling into January, we had a lot of data that was showing that interest rates were going to continue to rise. And in fact, they had gotten up well into the 7% range. The good news is that the spreads had improved. So even though we were at 7%, if spreads were back to where they were in the 2022, 2023 era, we would have actually seen interest rates well over 8%. So that's good news, but definitely the economic data was pushing us in the wrong direction. Well, in the last 30 days, we've had the tariff tap dance, which of course this week caused a sell-off in the stock market, and the Dow kind of fell as money moved into the bond market. We also had a couple of headline key metrics. CPI was one of those, and the PPI Producers Price Index was another one. With those missed indicators, and this is where I think this is important. I said earlier, the Fed policy makes up about 65% of the impact on interest rates. But the bond market and the other economic indicators that affect the 10-year Treasury note, that's where things can change even without the Fed changing policy. And in fact, as I'm sitting here, I just got a mortgage rate watch that said rates moved lower yet again today. So we're still on the way down. The stock selling off, that pushes bond prices up, which means that investors don't need as high of a yield, and that pushes yields down, which means the 10-year treasury goes down, and that combined with improved spread is just helping the market. So if we would have had this called 2 weeks ago, we would have been having a completely different conversation than we're having today. But when we look at 30-year fixed rate mortgages just over the last, I had a different graph I forgot to put in here that really shows what's happened over the last 30 days. But you can see January 10th, we were at 7.1. Today, we were at 6.79. This is an average of all loans originated on that date. So the reality is you wouldn't get 6.79, you get 6.625 or 6.75, but it shows you the trend. And of course, you can see October of 2023, we hit that high of basically 8%. I know we had some originations over 8%. So with that said, rates are coming down, and the closer that we get to 6, especially when we get stable for longer, you're going to see the sales pace pick up, and you'll see new mortgage applications. You'll see that trend pick up also. And so when we really look at this in terms of the 10-year treasury, which is what drives the 30-year fixed rate, you can just see this is actually the last 30 days. You can tell how much it's gone up and down. This is very unusual, especially in a period of time where the Fed has not made any rate cuts and is technically still stayed pretty hawkish on just indicating that they're not really open. They're definitely not in neutral territory, and they're not open for potential rate cuts soon. So you can see this 10-year treasury has dropped quite a bit. So 4.296 is today. If I were to do that math, 4.296, let me just do this real quick and I can tell you what the spreads are. Not a math in my head, guys. 6.79 minus 4.296. We're still at about a 2.5% spread between the 10-year treasury and 30-year fixed rate. So what that tells us is that you could see rates drop another maybe 0.75%, even without any move on the Fed policy. So I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens with tariffs over this next 30-day period. I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens with unemployment. And then just does this trend hold? 4.2 is a really key metric in the 10-year treasury, because when you move below 4.2, you tend to start to get into a new trend. So we'll watch it as it bounces around that 4.2, 4.3. But if it goes below 4.2, again, that will mean very good things for the mortgage markets and interest rates. So with that said, that brings us to the end of today's conversation and discussion. I trust that this was valuable. I really encourage you to go back, look at the individual trends, print them off for the ones that really help with your buyer presentations or your seller presentations. Add those to those listing presentations. Of course, Gary in the Red Book says, be the local economist of choice. And so understanding how to explain the market data can really help you to inform your clients, both to make good decisions for their part. But, I say this with love. Sometimes our clients are like our kids. They don't want to listen to us. And when you've got the data to back it up, it really positions you as the expert. It makes it hard to argue with. With decisions that they make that then lead to consequences. And there was a great panelist. It was actually one of the panelists on Heather's panel. He said, when you don't equip them with the information, when things go bad, they blame you. And you don't want them blaming you. You want them to blame the market. And I thought that was really eloquent that he said that. So with that in mind, I just want to give you guys a quick opportunity. If it was valuable, just put yes in the chat box if you got something from today. I appreciate it. Are there any questions comments, ahas, anything that you guys would want me to talk about here today based on what you've seen that you are still curious about. And good, I'm glad you guys got a lot of value. I see a lot of yeses in the chat box. Anybody have a question? I want to make sure we make use of it while we can, because if one person has it, probably everyone else has it. Okay. Not a lot of questions. So one just thought I want to leave you on. We are currently, and I've talked about this with certain groups of you. We're currently in the process of actually launching our mortgage company, Echelon Home Loans, and Echelon Home Loans is going to be an opportunity for our agents to be owners in a mortgage company. And this is a company that has the ability to scale very large. And it's just a very exciting opportunity. And we're bringing it to our agents because I'm passionate about helping our agents to be able to create horizontal income or passive income opportunities. So in the future, you'll probably see a loan originator on here with me talking about some of these things just as an opportunity for you to meet them and be a part of that. And we really look forward to that opportunity. It's a crazy market right now, and yet it's a really good time to be in that launch phase of the mortgage company. So watch for more information. If there's anything that you want covered on a future call, let me know. We're always happy to add that in here. Next month, I'm probably going to add in a little bit more condo data. We'll probably look at some absorption rate information because I haven't covered that in a while. And then I'm actually going to go into a little bit of the National Association of Realtors, the survey of home buyers and home sellers. There's some really key data in there that I think is important. So we'll actually touch on that. And that was a little bit of the vision speech. So with that, I wish you guys all the best in the next 30 days ahead. Keep your fingers crossed for improving interest rates and keep doing what you do best, which is serving the needs of your clients at a really high level. Thanks and have a great day.